We all love the horror film obsession, and many of you already know how it begins. A quiet, love struck young man finds an old charm called the One Wish Willow. He uses it to make the woman he loves fall for him completely. But what follows isn't romance, it's captivity. The devotion he wanted ends up destroying them both. The willow itself comes from the old British folklore. Willow trees have long been connected to wishing and grief, and to old stories about things that grant wishes too literally. In British and European folklore, the willow is deeply tied to grief, mourning, and lost love. By the 16th and 17th centuries, it had become a clear symbol of unrequited or forsaken love. So much so that jilted lovers were said to wear willow wreaths or leaves as a sign of sorrow. In Victorian England, willows were commonly planted in graveyards, and willow motifs were carved into tombstones, reinforcing their role as emblems of mourning. This association with grief is old, consistent, and well documented across British tradition. Willows are also linked to the supernatural, especially through their connection to water, the moon, and the unseen. In British folklore, they are tied to femininity, intuition, dreams, and the ancestors. And they are often found near rivers, streams, and damp places, which strengthens their link to the underworld and the spirit realm. In some Old English beliefs, a person could whisper their worries to a willow tree, and the tree would absorb their troubles, letting the wind carry them away. There is also a darker side to willow in British folklore. One English legend claimed that willow trees could uproot themselves at night and silently follow travelers through willow groves. People were advised to look behind them while walking near willows to make sure a tree was not following them. This is probably the closest the old folklore comes to the idea of a willow as an active, almost malevolent presence. In folk magic and witchcraft, willow was used for healing heartbreak and easing bereavement, as well as for dream work, divination, and moon magic. Rituals also existed in which a wish was tied to a knot in a willow branch and left on the tree until the wish was fulfilled. So the wish element does exist in willow folklore, but is part of ritual practice, than named as a one wish willow creature. But the idea at the center of the film is much older than one folklore. The idea that love taken by force, instead of given freely, becomes something monstrous. That idea shows up in cultures all over the world. Did you know Asia has been telling versions of this same story for centuries? In China, an old practice called gu poison bound a person to whoever fed it to them. If they tried to leave, the poison inside them woke up. In Japan, the legend of Kiyohime tells of a woman whose rejected love turned her into a serpent. She burnt the man she loved alive inside a temple bell. In the Philippines, a love potion called gayuma didn't create real affection. It erased a person's will completely, leaving them hollow and no longer in control of themselves. We can dive deeper into those legends in another video. But one of these traditions comes closest to what audiences saw on screen in Obsession, and in many ways, it is darker. It comes from a small town in Isan, northeastern Thailand, and it is called Nam Man Pry. Rin had been married to a nun for 11 years. For most of those years, people in town said the two of them made marriage look easy. He ran the family rice mill. She kept the accounts and raised their daughter. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, a comfortable silence between them. For weeks, people around town had mentioned it to him in passing. A woman kept asking about him, always the same quiet question, whether he was truly as happily married as everyone said. Anand never thought about it. He didn't even bother finding out who was asking. Her name was Willow. She ran the noodle stall near the market. She was a few years younger than him. And when he finally learned that it was her, he didn't take it seriously. He mentioned it to Rin once, laughing it off as something silly. She'll find someone, he used to say. Just not me. Rin never worried about it once. Not once. She was part of what made everything that happened afterwards so hard to explain to anyone who hadn't lived through it. It started one ordinary Tuesday. Anand came home from the mill later than usual. He seemed distracted, and he answered Rin's questions a moment too late, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. He barely touched his dinner. Their daughter had to ask him something twice before he responded. Rin assumed it was work. Rice prices had been unstable that season, and stress could show up in strange ways. By the end of the week, he had started disappearing in the evenings, telling her he was checking on deliveries. She believed him. There was no reason yet not to. Then on a Thursday, she saw him outside Wave's noodle stall. He was standing much closer to her than a customer should, leaning in close as they spoke. When Rin confronted him that night, she expected an argument, an apology, something she'd know how to answer. Instead, he acted like she was the one being unreasonable. When she brought it up, Anand's face showed no guilt at all. Instead, his expression was blank and distant, like he was simply waiting for the conversation to end so he could get back to something that mattered more to him. There's nothing happening, he said, in a voice that was technically his but didn't sound like him at all. You're imagining things. Anand, I saw you. You saw me being polite. He paused. There was something in his eyes, not quite anger, more like irritation at being kept from somewhere else he wanted to be. Can we not do this tonight? She let it go. Whatever this was, she didn't have a word for it yet, and she wasn't ready to be the one to name it. Within 2 weeks, she understood. The changes came quickly after that, each one a little harder to explain away than the last. Anand stopped sleeping properly. Rin would wake at 2 or 3 in the morning and find him sitting up in bed, eyes open, staring at nothing. His breathing was too shallow, too even, like he was controlling it on purpose instead of just breathing. When she touched his arm, it took him several seconds to notice. He began losing weight fast. Within a month, his clothes no longer fit him properly. His skin, once warm brown from years of outdoor work, turned grey and sunken, making him look years older in daylight. Some evenings, Rin noticed a faint smell on him, something that felt like stale meat, also something sweet. It felt like something was draining his kwan, which is the life force the old people still talked about, the thing that was supposed to keep a person's spirit steady inside their own body. But the worst part was his eyes. Rin had always been able to read exactly what he was feeling just by looking at him. That was gone now. In its place was a hollow, empty stillness. It only ever lifted for one reason: whenever Wave's name came up, or whenever he found some excuse to walk toward the market. Rin, unable to take any more, called on Anand's mother. Anand's mother had been alarmed by what she saw over dinner. She gently suggested that he take some time away from town to clear his head. Anand turned on her with anger that stunned the whole table, shouting, calling her interfering, saying that Wave was the only true person who had ever understood him. He had never said or believed anything like that in 11 years of marriage. His mother left the house in tears. Rin sat frozen at the table, listening to her husband defend a woman he had gently mocked only a few weeks earlier. It almost didn't sound like him, and it made no sense. What Rin did not know, what almost no one in town knew until much later, was what had brought Wave to that discussion in the first place. The year before, Wave had asked Anand, carefully and only once, whether he was truly happy in his marriage. He found her question rather amusing and let her know that he was. She accepted the answer quietly and went back to running her stall, convincing herself that the question hadn't cost her anything. It would later lead to consequences that she was never prepared for. You see, she was 39, unmarried, the last of five sisters still living at home. At every festival, someone's mother would ask, would it be her turn? Some evenings she would watch Rin and Anand sitting together on their porch from behind her stall. Wave wasn't filled with hatred. It was a constant, painful wanting that had started to feel like grief. One of her regular customers, an older woman who traveled between towns selling herbs, noticed how Wave watched over him. She didn't offer advice. She offered a name instead, a man 2 districts over who could help her with matters like this, for anyone willing to pay the price. She visited him twice before she agreed to anything. The Ajahn wasn't what she expected. He wasn't sinister. He seemed tired and businesslike, and he talked about what he was offering the same plain way a merchant talks about stock. He told her plainly what the oil was, where it came from, and what it would require of her afterward. He didn't lie about the offerings, the risk, or what might happen if she ever stopped feeding what she was about to bind herself to. She told herself she could manage it. She told herself love, once it arrived, would make the cost worth carrying. She was already wrong by the time she left the hut with the vial in her hand, but it would take a week before she understood how wrong. It would take months before it stopped mattering whether she understood it at all. Everything came to a head one night. Rin, exhausted and desperate, insisted Anand stay home instead of going to the mill to check something, which he had taken to saying almost every evening. He argued with her, quietly at first, then with a rising panic that frightened her more than shouting would have. At some point, he pushed past her toward the door, and when she blocked it with her body, he grabbed the chair beside him and threw it against the wall hard enough to crack the leg. He never touched her, but something in him had stopped being able to hold himself together. By midnight, he was shaking. By 1 in the morning, he had a fever that came from nowhere. Sweat soaked through the sheets. His whole body trembled as if something inside him was being starved. He began speaking in his sleep, more a low, pleading murmur, repeating a single woman's name over and over. It wasn't Rin's. It wasn't their daughter's. It was a woman's name Rin had not recognized at all, spoken with a kind of desperation that didn't seem to be about Wave. It felt like it belonged to something much older. By morning, exhausted and pale, Anand begged to be allowed to go see her. He begged with such desperation that it felt like his life depended on it. Watching him beg like that, Rin understood something for certain. Even without proof, this had stopped being about Wave a long time ago. The next day, she went to see an old woman who lived on the edge of town. May Brunstree wasn't a doctor. She was the kind of healer people went to after they've run out of other options. She had spent decades helping families with problems the local clinic had no charts for. Rin described everything: the eyes, the weight, the smell, the fever, and the name he murmured that belonged to no one she knew. May Boonsri didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked tired, like she had heard some version of this story before. Nam Man Pry, she said finally. Corpse oil. Someone paid to have this done to him. Rin didn't fully understand until May Boonsri explained. She spoke carefully, like someone forcing out words she wished weren't true. You've heard of May Nak, she said. It wasn't a question. Almost everyone in Thailand grew up hearing that story. The wife who died in childbirth and stayed behind anyway, refusing to let death separate her from the husband she loved, until her love became something that frightened the whole village. This comes from the same old belief. A woman who dies that way in childbirth is said to leave behind a death called Tai Tang Klom. Her Kwan doesn't want to let it go. It stays so full of unfinished longing that it becomes powerful, and anything that powerful can be controlled if someone cruel enough knows how. Somewhere, she said, a rogue Arjan had gone to a cemetery at night and dug up the body of a woman who had died exactly the same way. He had held a beeswax candle beneath her chin until the heat drew out a thin, dark oil. The oil was Nam Man Pry. It carried everything left of her unfulfilled longing to live and to be loved. The Arjan sold that oil to whoever was willing to put a good price for it. A few drops on the skin or slipped into food was enough. The spirit attached itself to whoever received it. From there, it worked its way into the mind slowly and quietly until the whole shape of a person had changed. She isn't loving him because she wants to, May Boonsri said. She's being made to force it into him, the same way it was forced out of her. Whoever bought this oil isn't controlling a spirit, they're renting one. And spirits like this don't stay rented forever. Rin asked what would happen if the spirit was starved or for whatever it was needed to stay calm. May Boonsri's answer wasn't comforting. The Ajahn, she explained, would feed the spirit steadily. Raw meat, raw blood, small grim offerings meant to keep it calm enough to follow instructions. If those offerings stopped, or if the victim's own will fought back hard enough, the spirit did not simply fade away. It turned on the victim, on whoever had summoned it, on anyone standing close enough to reach. Your husband's will is already fighting it, May Boonsri said. That's why he's suffering when he's kept away from her, and also making sure he doesn't attack you in the process. The pull and the resistance are happening at the same time, inside him, right now. Then we need to stop it now, however that's done, said Rin. The old woman looked at her for a long moment. Understand this, Rin. Breaking a bond like this rarely ends the way people hope. The spirit does not simply let go because we ask nicely. When it loses its grip on one thing, it very often reaches for whatever else is near. They went that same evening. Rin, May Boonsri, and two of Anand's brothers, following him at a distance as he half ran, half stumbled toward the small house behind the noodle stall where Willow lived alone. Inside, they found candles burning on every surface, a shallow dish on the kitchen floor, dark with something too thick to be sauce. Willow knelt before a small shrine in the corner, murmuring words in a language that wasn't quite Thai, not quite a language anyone recognized. She held a cracked glass vial tightly in both hands, and when she turned, she looked almost as hollow as Anand did. He's mine, Willow said before anyone spoke. Her voice cracked in the middle of the sentence as if two different people were fighting to use the same throat. She promised he'd be mine. May Boontree stepped forward carefully, murmuring old words of her own, and started throwing handfuls of rice and salt towards the shrine. For a moment, the room went completely still. It felt like the stillness right before something was about to happen. Then, the candle flames bent sideways all at once, though no wind moved through the house. Wave's eyes rolled back. The vial slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. The last of the dark oil spilled across the board in a thin, spidering line. In that same instant, Anand collapsed, screaming, clutching his chest like something inside it had just been torn loose. No one ever fully agreed on what happened in the next few minutes. It was chaos. Rin remembered a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. She remembered a smell, the same sweet rot she had only caught faint traces of on her husband's skin for weeks, now filling the whole room all at once. She remembered Wave's voice changing completely, dropping low, sounding grieving and furious at the same time. It no longer sounded like a jealous woman. It sounded like someone who had been kept from her own life, her own death, her own rest far too long. She remembered Anand's brothers dragging her out into the yard, while May Boontree stayed behind, chanting, refusing to leave, even as something crashed against the walls from inside. By the time the house went silent, dawn was already breaking. Wave ran into the night, screaming. Her hair was wild, her demeanor uncontrollable. They later learned that her relatives in another province took her in. People in town stopped repeating the details of what happened to her after that. We can all assume that whatever was in the room may have found a new host, but there is no confirmation of what actually happened to Wave. Anand survived. The fever broke that same night. Over the following weeks, the hollow look slowly left his eyes. He gained back his weight, his color, his sleep. In time, he became warm to Rin again, almost like before. But something in him stayed a little quieter, a little slower to laugh, as if some part of him still remembered being made to want something he never really wanted. He never spoke of that time, not once. When the topic came up years later, his eyes would drift somewhere else for a moment. Rin learned not to follow him there. She was just thankful he survived. The town talked about it for a while. Eventually, the story softened into something people only mentioned in passing, a fever that came around and kept the family away for a season. Rin let them believe that version. It was easier than the truth. And it protected Anand from becoming the man people whispered about at the marketplace for the rest of his life. May Boontree did one more thing before the year was out. Something she never explained to Rin, and Rin never asked about. She went alone to the cemetery on the edge of the district where the Ajahn was rumored to have worked. She left an offering at an unmarked grave, listed in the local records only by a date and the words, Mother, Child. She left rice, white flowers, and a small bowl of clean water. She didn't perform any ritual or speak any of the words she used at Wave's house. She simply stood there in silence for a while. And when she was about to leave, she said one thing to the grave before quietly turning back toward the road. You deserve better than what he asked of you. I hope you find it wherever you've gone. May Boontree wasn't a sentimental woman as far as anyone knew, but she never explained that afternoon, and no one who knew her well enough would ever push her to. No one in town ever found out who the rogue Ajahn had been or where he went after that night, or how many other small glass vials he might still have carried with him. May Bunsri only ever said one thing on this matter. The oil was made from a woman who only ever wanted to be loved honestly and never was. Someone sold what was left of that to a woman who wanted the same thing badly enough to steal it. Between them, they made a man carry their hunger inside him, and no one ever asked him if he wanted it. She looked toward the road leading out of the town, the one that led eventually toward the cemetery. Love that has to be forced into someone was never love to begin with. It's just hunger disguised as love. And hunger like that never stays satisfied with just one person for very long. Nam Man Pry is apparently still sold today as part of Thailand's occult amulet trade. There is no scientific evidence that any of its supernatural claims are real. My honest advice: if you want someone who doesn't want you back, walk away with your dignity intact. No risk is worth the damage it could cause to you, or to them, or anyone else involved. Thailand is not the only place that learned this lesson the hard way. Somewhere in China, a jar of poison is still waiting for someone desperate enough to use it. Somewhere in Japan, an old temple bell still stands, the same one that once melted from a woman's fury. Somewhere in the Philippines, someone is still being quietly warned never to accept a drink from the wrong hands. We'll get to those in later episodes. For now, I would love to know your thoughts about this video in the comments. What other folklores would you like me to cover that have appeared in a show or movie? I'd love to do a deep dive on it. I write original horror stories and publish new videos every week. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And remember, love should be earned. Stay curious and keep your lantern lit.